Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. Many Muslims are familiar with NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims. It's an organization that focuses on human rights, civil liberties, and public advocacy on behalf of Canadian Muslims. But who's the man at the helm of the organization? Let the Quran Speak is about to get up close and personal with Ihsaan Gardee. He's the Executive Director of NCCM. What does Ihsaan do on a day-to-day basis? You're about to find out. We ask him to share his reflections on the challenges of advocating on behalf of a much maligned religious community. Are things getting better for Canadian Muslims, or are they getting worse? Here's the interview now. Ihsaan Gardee, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, what does it mean to be personally advocating on behalf of Muslims?
Wow. Well, what does it mean to be personally advocating? I have to say that, I'm a small part of an organization, and it's really a team effort. And to be fair, it is the team that does the lion's share of the work. They deserve the lion's share of the credit. While my face might be the one that you see on the television for interviews or press conferences, or my name may be on opinion editorials that you may read in major newspapers, none of the work that happens at NCCM happens without the input and the backing of this amazing team of individuals that I'm very blessed to work with. We have 5 staff currently, myself, Human Rights Coordinator Amy Awad, Amira El-Gawabi, who is the Human Rights Coordinator before Amy, but Amira is on maternity leave right now. We have Shirini Darichi in Ottawa, our Office Coordinator, and here in Toronto and Milton we have Mariam Dadaboy, who is our GTA Community Relations Coordinator. And all of those folks, that's just the staff. And then we have a board of directors, a national board of directors from coast to coast, as well as volunteers who work on different committees for us. Our Media Relations Committee, we have a Human Rights Committee comprised of volunteer lawyers, law students, and social justice workers who do the day-to-day work on the cases that we receive, cases including a broad range, a spectrum of different issues, whether it's discrimination, anti-Muslim harassment, visitations from CSIS. It all varies, and no day is ever the same.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were born in Canada, so is there something about your background that led you to desire social justice and to want to fight for it? Well,
I was born in Canada, but my father is South African and my mother is Swedish. So you could kind of say that social justice is in my blood with my experience and growing up as I did with that sort of a unique background, understanding the struggle that went on in South Africa with apartheid, and the fact that I grew up towards the end of apartheid, but in fact my parents, their being married was even against the law during the apartheid era in South Africa with their Intermarriages Act, not allowing them, because they were from two different ethnicities, 2 different cultural backgrounds, to even be married. So yeah, it's sort of in the blood.
How did stories like that affect you then?
Well, I don't know. I think for me personally, I grew up with it, so it was normal. I didn't think anything of it. It was, they were just mom and dad to me. I never saw them as sort of being, looking at them through those lenses as different. They were just my parents, and that was all I ever knew. So it was all I ever thought was normal.
So you were born in Canada.
Yes.
So what was it like growing up as a Canadian Muslim?
Well, I was born in Canada, but shortly after I was born, we actually moved back to Sweden.
Okay.
And where I grew up and lived for about 5 years, and I learned a little bit of Swedish, which is interesting to be able to speak Swedish. I still have my Swedish, and then after we lived in Sweden, we decided to move back to Canada in the early 80s. And growing up as a Muslim in Canada, I think it's been an experience for me. And I think each person who comes to Canada or who grows up in Canada has a different experience based on the context in which they find themselves, whether they're living in a major urban center or they're living in a rural area. A lot of things impact, I think, what your experience is going to be like growing up here.
Did you experience discrimination?
I didn't so much experience discrimination as a Muslim growing up, because Islam really wasn't in the public spotlight so much. I would say I experienced discrimination more because people saw me as different, because my parents were from 2 different backgrounds and they couldn't quite place me. I remember being, called a Paki, and I thought to myself, but I'm not even Pakistani. I was more confused by it than anything else.
Okay.
Eventually, I think as time went by and I started to meet people and make friends with people, that sort of stuff sort of faded into the background.
Mm-hmm. What is it like to be an executive director of NCCM?
Well, I am the 4th executive director
Okay.
of NCCM, which a lot of people don't know. There's been 4 executive directors. The first executive director was a lady by the name of Nadine, and after her, there was a gentleman by the name of Riyad Saluji, and then his replacement, Carl Nickner, and then eventually me. The job of the executive director is one that is a trust. Excuse me. It's something that I think you take on knowing that it is going to be a challenge, but it's also one that is enormously rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
I have been just amazed by the type of people that I've been privileged to work with, but also privileged to meet in and through the course of my work as the executive director of NCCM. People who so selflessly give of their time, effort, knowledge, and commitment that I'm really in awe of them. And they're the ones who are behind the scenes, whose names you don't see, who really deserve more praise than I can even give.
Mm-hmm. Now, you guys are a human rights and civil rights organization. Tell me what sort of stories you personally hear of discrimination and prejudice against Muslims, because sometimes people don't actually connect. Like, what are Muslims actually experiencing living in Canada?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, I mean, we are a human rights and civil liberties organization. So we work on high-profile cases, for example, of Canadian citizens who have been detained abroad. So perhaps the one case that really launched the organization to the national stage was the case of Meher Arar, the Canadian citizen who was rendered to torture in Syria and spent a year there before eventually being brought back to Canada. And we worked on other high-profile cases of Canadians detained abroad, Ahmed al-Malki, Moayed Nuruddin, and others as well. And we're still working on cases of and Abdullah al-Malki, if I didn't mention that. And we're still working on cases of other Canadians who are still detained abroad. For example, Bashir Makhtal in Ethiopia, or Hussein Jalil, who's been stuck in China for at least going on 8 more so years now, many years. But that's the high-profile work.
Do you get phone calls from people saying, look, I'm at work and this happened, what do I do, kind of thing?
I was just about to get to that. That's the high-profile work, but the bulk of our work is more what I call, or like what I prefer to term, day-to-day cases, not the cases that receive the media glare. I don't like to term them less important, because I think if you've been discriminated against, it's very important to you. So we get calls from ranging from people who've had a problem at work, getting time off to pray or to attend Eid prayer, or people having an issue with uniform policies, wanting to wear hijab at work and being told that they can't. So it varies from day to day, and it's hard to predict, but those are the types of cases that we generally see more often.
How easily are those cases resolved?
Well, we try and take a very much a graduated approach. We prefer not to be very confrontational, because very often what we find is that if we take an approach that seeks to find a mutually agreeable resolution, that tends to be a lot more effective than going in, sort of threatening people with human rights commissions or anything like that. The other thing you have to remember, Sophia, is that very often these types of incidences are not motivated, I would say in the majority of cases, are not motivated by malice, genuine hatred for Muslims and Islam. A lot of the times it's simply a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness about Islam, about Muslims and Muslim religious practice. So once you have a chance to actually sit down with people face to face and explain to them, for example, Friday prayers, and you say, well, Muslims attend Friday prayers in a similar manner that Christians go to church on Sunday, and Jews have their Saturday Sabbath. Sort of the light goes on, and people realize that, wow, okay, well, I didn't think of it that way. Yeah, and very often we're able to find resolutions once we've gone through a process of explaining what the requirements are and why people are making these requests for accommodation.
Do you think that your advocacy of Muslims is an uphill battle? Is it getting better for Canadian Muslims, or is it getting worse?
Is it getting better, or is it getting worse? Well, I'm an optimist by natural disposition, and it's something that the faith teaches us as well, is to trying to be optimistic as well. Post 9/11, there was obviously a very noticeable spike in anti-Muslim sentiment and anti-Muslim reported incidents of anti-Muslim discrimination and harassment. And you know, anecdotally, I can tell you that whenever a high-profile incident occurs in the media, for example, anti-terrorism arrests or whatever the case may be, an act of extremist violence, we anecdotally tend to see an increase in reporting. Does that mean that there's necessarily more more numbers of cases of discrimination and harassment occurring? Not necessarily. It may just be that because of a greater awareness, people are thinking, well, maybe I should be reporting it. And our consistent message to people is, regardless of how minor the incident is, you should report it to the correct authorities if it's a criminal act, for example, a hate crime, as well as reporting it to NCCM, so that an accurate record of these types of incidents can be kept. This is critical because it's important for our organization when speaking to government, when speaking to the media, to be able to speak from a point of solid numbers, because you're always asked that whenever you go on a media interview. How many cases are you getting, and can you quantify it? And without those numbers, it's very difficult to get a sense of what exactly is occurring. And people who work in the field of hate crimes themselves. In fact, just yesterday I met with folks from the York Regional Police Hate Crimes Unit. They themselves will tell you that the amount of hate crimes that actually get reported is grossly underreported, and for a variety of different reasons. People are concerned, and they have valid concerns. They're worried about potentially negative reaction from their employer, for example, if it's an employer-related incident, possible further attacks. They're just concerned about their safety. They want to just get on with life. They don't want to make a big deal out of it. So for a variety of different reasons, people choose not to report. But we urge people continuously that it's so important for them to report these types of incidents, so that we can keep this accurate record, and also so that when we are speaking to people in positions of authority, whether it's political leaders or people in the media, we're able to convey an accurate picture of what is occurring on the ground.
We don't have much time yet, but I want to ask you one final question. What are your hopes for Canadian Muslims in the future? Where do you want to see Canadian Muslims?
Well, Canadian Muslims, there's a misperception, I think, that Canadian Muslims are new to Canada. Muslims have been in Canada since before Confederation. The perception that they're new to Canada, however, isn't an unfair one, because what we've seen is we've seen large influxes and changes to the demographics of our country through changes in immigration policy, changes in multiculturalism policy. So this perception that Canadian Muslims are new to Canada is a natural one. And you know, when I look at what other communities have been through, I'm very optimistic, because I look at other communities like the Japanese Canadians, like the Doukhobors, and I see the types of challenges that they went through when they were first perceived as being new to this country. And in many ways, the challenges that Canadian Muslims now face mirror those same challenges that previous communities have been through. So that's why, one of the reasons why I'm very optimistic, because I feel that what we need to do is look at how they dealt with some of these challenges, so that we can try and find ways that we can constructively deal with the challenges that our community is now facing. And one of those ways that we deal with the challenges is by demonstrating how we are integrated into this society, and how we have the same concerns, hopes, and dreams as our fellow citizens, so that we're viewed as being part of the Canadian fabric.
Ihsaan, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophia.
We'll take a break, and when we return, we will do a book review, How Jesus Became God.